Uh, Excellent, thank you. Meeting recording has started. We are online only today with a relatively short agenda. Expect that we'll be wrapped up within an hour here. Um, and I believe that Phil Brown, the chair, is out today, so Zach, as our co-chair, you are welcome to take us through the agenda, or if you feel like delegating that to me or somebody else, I'm happy to run through it as well.
Was that a gentle nudge, Justin?
No, no, no,
Um,
just it's all yours, and do with it as you will. So,
I appreciate that. I'm just teasing you. Why don't we do a quick round of introductions of department staff and Groundwater Advisory Committee members? Um, Justin, you want to start us off?
all right, so sounds great. For department staff, I'm Justin Iverson. I manage the groundwater section here at the department and facilitate the groundwater advisory committee. And Laura.
Laura Hart, I'm a water policy analyst, and I'm just helping out with the IT stuff today.
And Chris.
Good morning, I'm Chris Bird, manager of Well Construction. I'm just been observing today. Thank you.
And I think that's everybody, Zach.
Yeah, great. Okay. Well, for the advisory committee, I'm Zach Freed. I'm a hydrologist with the Nature Conservancy calling in from Bend. Richard, maybe I'll toss it over to you next.
Richard Smith, grumpy old farmer up in the Cooper Mountain Critical Groundwater area.
Great. Lance?
Hey, good morning. I'm Lance Lindo. I'm the Environmental Health Administrator for Klamath County with a bit of background in watersheds. Thanks.
Great. Ken, is that you on the phone?
Yeah, and I'm Ken Maston, just a Southern Oregon irrigator.
Thanks, Ken. Brandon?
Brandon Brown, water well contractor out of Umatilla, Oregon.
Awesome. And oh, welcome, Phil. We were just going through introductions.
Hey, Phil Brown, hydrogeologist from Beaver Creek.
And Trent, I think, is the last one, right?
Yeah, Trent Kastner. I'm representing the monitoring well portion of the group.
Great. And with that, my reign of terror as the co-chair has ended now that the real chair is here. So Phil, back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Trent. Sorry for being late. For whatever reason, Zoom decided it wanted to update today, and it took me a while to get through that. All right. Sorry, let me find my agenda. Thanks. Got our two meeting summaries to go through, and I need to pick up the agenda. Pardon me, hang on.
Oh, that's okay. I can share it here as well.
All right. So we've had the call to order introductions. Now we have the meeting summaries as item B of the agenda for March 2024 and May 2024. I reviewed both prior to the meeting and don't have any suggested changes or comments about the summaries. Has everybody else had a chance? Anybody else had a chance to look them over?
This is Trent. I have also, and I agree with you.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Richard. I've read them over. I move we approve them as written.
Thanks, Richard.
I'll second that.
Great. So do we need a vote on that? So for all in favor of approving those, I guess for aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Then so approved. So now we're under the 3-year review of the critical groundwater area for Justin. Give us an update.
Okay. Thank you very much, Phil. So again, for today, the next two items, C and D, are groundwater items that are on the docket for the commission meeting, which runs Thursday, Friday this week. They're meeting in Bend. Reminder that with respect to groundwater allocation, we extended the public comment period such that anybody that came to the commission meeting and wanted to talk with them about the rules, that would still be within the comment period. So that closes Friday at 5, unless Laura corrects me otherwise. And the purpose of that is just to, like I said, to make sure that any public comments received during the commission meeting can go into the record if they pertain to allocation. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First thing that's on the docket here is to go over what we call a 3-year review of critical groundwater areas. I'm gonna run through the presentation I'm planning to give to the commission on Friday. Please stop me if you have any questions or comments. This is certainly not set in stone, and I can adjust things. So if you've got input on how to make it better, I'm all ears. Let's see, I'm gonna open up the chat here. Oh, for the record, great. And let's see here. Sorry, I want to make sure that I'm. Oh. A reshare here. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Okay, now I believe you're seeing just the slide, not the speaker notes, correct?
I've got, I think, notes off to the right. No, I think the second slide showing up to the right, but no notes.
Yeah, it's showing next slide.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, let me switch that. There we go. All right, now it should just be the slide.
Justin, we're still seeing presenter
Yeah.
view.
Oh my
Still
gosh,
seeing
wild.
next. Yeah.
All right, sorry. How about I try something different? I'll share this. Swap this one more time. Okay, how about now?
Now it's perfect.
All right, excellent. So overview of this presentation, I'm just going to talk about the groundwater administrative areas in general to put critical areas in context, talk about this periodic review, and then instead of stepping through all 7 existing critical areas, just going to focus on 2 examples, Cooper Bowl Mountain and Butter Creek, and link those to similarly responding critical areas throughout the rest of the state. So first of all, wanted to pop up the legislative groundwater policy here and talk about where critical areas come from and where they fit into policy, and that there's a relatively long list of criteria for which the commission may develop a critical groundwater area. But the main one and the only one we've used to date is water level declines that meet the definition of excessively declined. We've got a number of different types of groundwater restricted areas, and the tools or the criteria on the left here, most of them are forward-looking. So we've got a mitigation area in the Deschutes. That's our only example, in which we can have a formal mitigation program for new uses. We have a classification system in the basin program rules where we can potentially limit new allocation of water. But again, that's all forward looking from the point of classification. I'll note that in the Willamette Basin Program rules, there have been defined groundwater limited areas. That's just a special type of classification, or a type of classification that they decided to give its own particular name in the Willamette Basin Program rules. We have serious water management problem areas, which is a method to require water use measuring devices and water use reporting. That actually has a backward-looking component where that can require meter installation and reporting on older water rights. But other than the use and reporting, that's the kind of extent of the authorities given there. And then finally, the critical groundwater area, which is the pretty much the only mechanism we have to curtail existing groundwater users. Map of where those areas are located is here. And the kind of orangish colors are the critical areas. They exist mostly in the north here with Cow Valley out. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor. Maybe I'll get a pointer out here. Okay, so they're mostly in the northern part of the state, mostly in Columbia River basalt aquifers, except for Cow Valley, which is an alluvial valley that sits over here by its lonesome. And I'm, again, going to focus mostly on two areas here in these two locations. Okay. So we do what we call these 3-year reviews in order to comply with statutory criteria here in ORS 537-780, and which says that at least once every 3 years, the commission shall review any rule that restricts groundwater use in an area. And that review process shall include a public notice and an opportunity to comment. So bringing this up in front of the commission so that they can review it, as well as posting that publicly so folks can come and provide comments on it, is the mechanism by which we comply with this critical area order. So gonna move on to two examples. Cooper Bowl Mountain, which is, as Richard mentioned at the top, where his home place is located here to the well, I was about to say to the west of the Portland metro area, but the metro area is probably well encompassed Cooper Bowl Mountain by this point. So it is a basalt upland that was developed in the 50s and 60s primarily for municipal use. Hydrograph of the area starting a bit late after development, so water levels were probably higher before our records started, but municipal development had already been significantly established. Water levels were falling pretty obviously. Critical area was established in the early 1970s, and it was a relatively lengthy process. So discussion had already begun 1970, maybe earlier, and the municipalities were already planning what they would do once a critical area was established. And relatively rapidly, we saw some recovery of water levels as the cities brought on external supplies. So the critical area process found that the authorized water rights were in excess of the sustainable yield. well, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's talk a little bit more on this hydrograph. So a few other things that I should mention. So the city's developed essentially interties with City of Portland and the Bull Run watershed, some entity that I'm not recalling off the top of my head that tapped the Clackamas River watershed, as well as the Scoggins Reservoir development and Tualatin watershed, and basically imported surface water to offset their reliance on groundwater in this area. And I think that happened in a couple phases that you can see here. This little dip is associated with a mining development. And then we see, starting in the 2010s, aquifer storage and recovery projects starting to be developed in the area. And in the wintertime, water levels in some parts of Cooper Bull Mountain come up to land surface. And then that seasonal storage is pumped in the summer to meet peak day demands. So overall, the authorized water rights in the critical area are still in excess of the sustainable yield, but they're mostly held by municipalities and are largely unused. The municipal users were able to reduce their use again through importing surface water supplies, and that led to recovery of groundwater levels. And then aquifer storage and recovery projects have restored at least winter water levels to artesian conditions. So overall, we've seen a relatively good recovery in that critical area. And that's been facilitated by the ability to find alternate sources and develop these artificial storage techniques. Go ahead, Richard.
We have some mine dewatering going on currently in the area also. Doesn't seem to be affecting the groundwater level severely, but it should be noted that it is going on.
Yep. Good point, and thank you for bringing that up. I'll add that to the speaker notes to note that that's in there. All right.
Hey, Justin, this is Ken. What exactly did he say again? I missed that.
Oh, sure. Richard mentioned that there are still some active aggregate quarries in the Cooper Bull Mountain area, and they do dewater those quarries, and that affects water levels in the vicinity of those aggregate mines.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. All right. So I'm going to contrast that now with the Butter Creek critical groundwater area. Also Columbia River basalts. And this time on the east side in the Umatilla Basin, where there is less precipitation. I guess I didn't mention that perhaps one of the reasons that water levels came up when use declined is because there's just significantly more opportunity for natural recharge on the west side than the east side. It might be difficult to see, but I'll point out that this Butter Creek area, which is outlined in blue, is also broken into a number of sub areas where, to the best of our ability in the 1980s, we divided this up in map view such that wells inside those sub areas generally reacted similarly. Data collection since the 80s or 90s has proven that we didn't quite capture every well in the exact right sub area, but in general, it's a fair designation, I think. So again, our water level data collection started when declining trends were already in place, so you can kind of mentally project these trends probably back in time quite a bit. In this case, which is from the Pine City sub area, water levels had fallen about 300, or excuse me, at least 150 feet, probably more, before the critical area was established. And eventually, through active management, by which we allocate what we have termed a sustainable annual yield in the past, we have some unit of water that we feel is relatively sustainable, or we felt that way when we set up the critical areas, and we allocate that just to the senior users. Then that reduction in pumping has reduced the water level decline rate, but we still have some declines, though they're slower than they used to be. In other sub areas, the rate seems to be relatively similar despite the SAY allocation. So rates of decline are roughly the same in the south sub area as when the critical area was established. So a little less successful in our management at that point. Last example here is from the Echo Junction sub area. In this case, critical area was established, saw some reduction in the overall slope of decline. But the reason that I put this up here is because a few folks have developed agricultural ASR projects in the area. And essentially, they are using these ASR projects to augment or irrigate lands that would otherwise be curtailed off under junior rights. And they're using essentially all the water that they put in. So even though they've developed recharge projects here, the ultimate result has been to maximize crop yield, not necessarily lead to aquifer recovery. So I think that some of the municipal projects in the Cooper Bowl Mountain have leave more water in the aquifer year on year, at least over time. So, in summary here for Butter Creek, we've managed that area with an annual allocation of a sustainable annual yield. We've curtailed off about 63,000 acre feet of junior water rights. They remain on the books, so if water levels turn around somehow, then we can allocate additional water to those junior users, or if the senior users, for whatever reason, aren't using their full allocation, we'll allocate that down the priority list. But there's a good percentage of folks that haven't been able to use their water rights for a few decades now. Groundwater level declines continue, but at lower rates in most cases, and we expect that will continue until or unless the sustainable annual yield values are updated or the sub-area boundaries are reevaluated. So, I think that the positive, like in summary, the positive critical area outcomes to date are associated with the development of alternate surface water sources. And while we can curtail off junior groundwater users, especially on the east side where there's not a lot of natural recharge, it's really difficult for those aquifer systems to recover. That said, all of the water rights that led to the overallocation, I want to reemphasize, those are still all on the books, so to say. They aren't valid for use, but they're there if something changes in the system or with artificial recharge or something else in the future. For the commission, because the statute says, hey, review the need for these critical areas, our recommendation is essentially that that we maintain the existing critical area controls. And eventually we'll want to come back to these areas in Butter Creek and elsewhere where declines continue. But for right now and for some time, I mean, we've been aware that the declines have continued in some of these areas, and we are focusing on well, the Harney Basin right now. We're focusing on areas that don't have any controls before we put our resources toward reevaluating areas that have some controls that we know aren't perfect. So go ahead, Phil.
Hey, would you go back to that, the last hydrograph?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and it's just, I think everybody's sort of inclination is to find the exception to the generalization, you know, and be curious about it. So you characterized in the Butter Creek critical groundwater area, you know, that water levels continue to decline. And that's clearly true on 2 of those hydrographs, but on this last one, if you look at from 2015 on, you know, it's like water levels did decline after the advent of ASR at a couple of those agricultural properties. But wouldn't you say that for like the last, say, 6 years, that they're relatively flat? You know, they're certainly not declining. They're either flat or barely declining.
yeah.
Unlike the previous part of this hydrograph and the other 2 hydrographs. Do we have any kind of theory about why that might be a little bit different than generally correct generalization that water levels remain declining? Is it proximity to ASR wells, so they finally got to a point where we're stabilizing things? I mean, your point was fair that the ASR wasn't implemented for a restoration effort. It was implemented to keep some land in production.
Yeah.
But there does seem to be an effect because that hydrograph's different than the other 2.
Yeah, it's a good point. So yes, that looks relatively stable. I'm curious. So here, bear with me, and we'll just do a quick I'm curious how the scale plays into that. But it might very well be. I mean, I don't want to so
I just think everybody's eye kind of goes to the exception to the rule, and you may get a question about that.
yeah, no, I agree, and I appreciate that. So okay, the well we're going to look at is here. There's an ASR well here and up this direction generally. And I am curious if we were to zoom way in. No, you know, you're right. That looks pretty good since 2019, doesn't it? So thank you for pointing that out, and I will adjust accordingly.
Yeah, nothing super conclusive or super dramatic, but so you may get a question about that.
Yeah. No,
why is that? You know?
Yeah, right. Especially spanning those, you know, relatively dry years in the early 2020s, makes me curious to go back and just look at the actual use reporting. So
yeah, and I was, when you were looking, I was thinking kind of the same thing about recharge. So in the other hydrographs, I always focus in on that 1996 period, right? When it was so crazy wet, and thinking, well, do we see any response there? The answer was not really.
not really, yeah. Yeah. No. All right. Any other questions in general on the critical area?
Maybe some just quick friendly feedback, Justin. I appreciated at the end that you mentioned that the intent was to simply reevaluate the intent for the commission was to reevaluate whether those critical areas should be maintained or not. Might be worth just you know, slipping that in right up front, you know, somewhere around slide 7 when you're saying like, you know, we're reviewing the need for these critical areas and like, you know, we're having public comment and all that good stuff. Because otherwise I I certainly felt the inclination to start, thinking more about the details about the critical groundwater areas. But if the question is just, do we keep them or not? That's a very different conversation than if the question is, let's adaptively manage all of them and figure out all the details and dive into the weeds. So I think that might be useful.
No, thank you for that.
Also,
Yeah.
of course. Another thing is if the so totally understand that the idea is to use Cooper Bull Mountain and Butter Creek as two examples of the other critical groundwater areas. It might be helpful even if I know you have limited time, but if you can just say like how many total critical groundwater areas are there, Justin?
7.
7. So of the 7, how many of those 7 or how many of the other 5 look like Cooper Bull Mountain? And how
Yes.
many of the other 5 look like Butter Creek? Just to give the commission a sense of like, what are the other ones? How are the other ones responding to this management designation?
Thank you. Appreciate the feedback, and I will incorporate those.
Sure.
All right. So let's see. I'm just looking down. All right. So, with that, unless there's any other questions on the critical areas, I'm going to move on to D here.
Sorry, I did have another question.
Okay, go. Yeah.
Well, I guess I hear you loud and clear. The intent right now is to focus on areas that don't have protections, with the ultimate goal of eventually revisiting critical groundwater areas where declines are still being seen. Is there anything resembling a timeline to add to that statement? Is it like we want to do this in the next 5 years, 50 years?
Yeah. There is no timeline associated with that. We've certainly recognized that, and so this is a 3-year review. So 6 years ago already, we had the same approach, but we had a significantly smaller department, and we weren't even addressing the new areas, frankly. So we've seen some staff growth, and we've put that effort toward the Harney Basin. I think that we'll have to see what comes of the Walla Walla study in the end, and if we feel like we need additional controls there. We have had on our radar for quite some time the 15-mile creek drainage, which is south of the Dalles. I've shown some hydrographs there as examples of excessively declined. Water levels have dropped 125 feet or so. So that's another area where we're looking. There's other criteria and other places to look. So I suspect, eventually there'll be a time where we don't see any place in the state with declines that are any faster than what we're seeing in Umatilla, and maybe that's the time to come back to those existing areas, but I can't predict what that's going to be exactly.
And follow up, the reason for that is because you would need a full rulemaking process in order to adjust the sustainable yield.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So the Division 10 rules, which govern critical area designations, have changed since, well, relatively soon after those Umatilla, Butter Creek, Stage Gulch designations. And while those orders and the rules that followed them say that we should be adjusting, for example, the sustainable annual yield, since the Division 10 rule changes, I think that would take the full-blown effort. And as you know, we're still working out the kinks in the process of how we do that in the Harney, and likely setting some precedent for how we'll go on. But it's by no means a short process. So.
Thank you.
Yep. Anything else on critical areas? Okay. So moving on to agenda item D, the ongoing rulemaking updates. Just real briefly. So I already gave essentially the update on the groundwater allocation rulemaking earlier. Again, public comment period is going to close this Friday at 5 o'clock after the end of the commission meeting. Then we'll be moving into a process of summarizing and drafting response comments to all of the public comments received, or all the major topics of the public comments received, not comment by comment. We plan to have that summary report drafted for the commission in August. Laura, is that fair?
Yeah, I think we've got to get it to the commission ahead of the September meeting, so
Yeah.
it would have to be August.
And I will, once we provide that to the commission, I'll make sure that we get copies or notify this body so you folks can see that response document. And then we will be going in September, at least as the plan stands now, to request that the commission adopt the rules then. So this group will have a preview of that the Tuesday before the September commission meeting. I will real quick pull up the
12th and 13th, if that's what you're looking for, September.
Yeah. So that means that GWAC would meet September 10th. So we'll be chatting about that on the 10th. And I think that's everything new with the allocation rulemaking. Appreciate again all the work of this group back in May to come up with your advice. And that's gone into the rulemaking record as well. I'm going to give a real brief update on 512. Tim Seymour wasn't able to join us today. As I actually just mentioned in discussing with Zach, that rulemaking, so Division 512 is the basin program rules for Malheur Lakes Basin, which is inclusive of the Harney groundwater area where we've done so much work in the past. And the purpose of the rulemaking is to discuss establishment of a critical area for portions of the Malheur Lakes Basin or the Harney Basin sub area there. We've had a very active public engagement process on many fronts. So that was the location of a place-based planning pilot, which is still ongoing. We involved a study advisory committee during the USGS cooperative study of the area. We've had a number of public meetings, and the community has had their own meetings together. And so as we have been, well, and I'll say, as some of the longer standing members here on the committee recall, we updated the Division 10 rules, which again governed how we designate critical areas going forward. And we are going through the process of implementing those Division 10 rules and the critical area designation for the first time since the new rules, first time in 30 years, and kind of feeling our way through it. And I think certainly the Harney community, with all the public participation we've had, they want to be very well involved. And so we have had 5 racks to date. Does that sound right, Zach? Oh my gosh, nope, 8. And we have 4 more on the books at least. So, one thing that we have done in this process is the community asked us to hire a neutral facilitator for some of the meetings. So we have folks from the National Policy Consensus Center on board to help run those meetings and make sure that we get everybody's perspective out in the open and included. And right now we are working on discussing potential sub areas, discussing alternate remedies such as enforcing on permit decline conditions, discussing what the targets are for the aquifer water levels as a whole that we would be aiming to achieve with any critical area, either curtailment by priority date or voluntary agreement, talking about voluntary agreements and what those might include. And I will probably leave it there for my part and just foreshadow that coming into our September and December meetings and on into early 2025, that this critical area rulemaking is probably going to take the place of allocation as the thing that we keep coming back to at this group, and getting much more detailed and getting your guys' input as well on how that looks and any suggestions you have for that designation potentially in, I don't know, I don't even want to say potentially in 2025, but I suspect that's roughly what we're looking at. So I know that Zach has been involved in that. So Zach, if you have anything that you'd like to add, I'd welcome your comments as well.
Nothing significant. I think one change that might be of interest to this committee is a shift that I'm really grateful for and appreciative of Tim Seymour's leadership in the department, that there will be some ModFlow 6 runs to help inform the conversations about what permissible total withdrawal looks like in the basin. I think that's a smart move from the department. I think it's going to provide more clarity in the conversation with the community.
Hey, Zach, is USGS operating the model, or is that being done at the department?
I don't want to speak for the department. Justin, you want to take this?
Yeah, sure. So the GS developed the model,
Yeah.
and the department will be running the scenarios.
Okay.
We'll be modifying the input files for, and I really appreciate what the GS did this time around. They built the kind of backward looking model and calibrated it as a component, and then they built a forward looking component to the model where it takes the calibrated model as the initial conditions and then projects forward to 2100, I believe. And so we can take that calibrated model and just alter the forward looking input files and have our best understanding or information about general impacts of various scenarios going forward. So they designed it in a way that was supportive of that. I guess just of interest, I'll mention that there was also a side component to this modeling project where Bill Yeager is an applied economist at OSU in the Department of Ag, and he built a companion economic decision-making model that goes into that. It hasn't been published yet, but it's in press apparently, and so we might have that to use as well. So remains to be seen. The department is a bit less what's the right word? We aren't economic modelers. How's that? Department doesn't hire any economists. So.
But the intent of that model is to evaluate the economic impacts to the basin from different scenarios?
That's correct. Yeah. Yep.
I dropped a date in the chat, but so on June 27th, USGS is going to present on the model in the morning, and we're going to record it and it'll be posted. And then the RAC is meeting in the afternoon, just for folks that are interested.
Okay, and I will see if I can get that information out to this group as well in case you would like to tune in for Steve Gingrich from the USGS is going to be presenting the the model design and how it works, answering questions. So folks here are welcome to attend if you're interested. And I suspect it'll be recorded as well, so you don't have to be there at the time. All right, any other questions regarding the ongoing rulemaking?
I guess I have one just because it's relevant to the prior conversation about critical groundwater areas. Justin, you had mentioned that for the other 7 critical groundwater areas that are already established, doing some adaptive management, making some changes would require additional rulemaking. And since adaptive management has been a substantial piece of the conversation with the Harney Basin community, do you anticipate that also being the case for this Harney Basin critical groundwater area, acknowledging that this is the first of the the first test of the new Division 10 rules?
Yeah. Good question. I don't have a pat answer. I will say philosophically, I think it would be great to build in an adaptive management structure. And we're still assessing whether the statutory and rule authority support that or to what degree it supports it. So just with the process as it's set up of the requirement to go through a contested case process in order to make curtailments, we're assessing how that needs to act. Like, how do we incorporate that into a potential adaptive management framework? So that's still an unknown that we're trying to work out. But I absolutely agree if we could build that into the rules and everybody agrees and understands kind of these if then statements, that would be wonderful so that we didn't have to go back and do this, very lengthy process anytime we wanted to make a change or needed to make a change or saw from the information that a change is warranted to meet the goals. So
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks. I'd be interested in continuing that conversation, especially in the context of the 3-year reviews. Your point is well taken that the department just doesn't have enough capacity to keep going back and revisiting these on any realistic time frame. So
yeah. Yep.
If there are ways to build in that flexibility, that seems important, not just for the Harney Basin, but for future critical groundwater area designations as well.
Yep. Agreed. Okay. Well, Phil, I'll hand it back over to you.
Oh, well, concluding agenda item D. The next agenda item is public comments. So we're open to public comments if there are any.
So just want to make sure, Eric or Matthew, if you had any public
I have
comments today.
comments. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't have comments. I am curious how and where to show up to see the Division 512 RAC meetings. I'd like to hear more about that USGS model.
Okay. So let's see, Matthew, I will try to see if I can find a
Drop
link.
the web page, so the website, and if you go there, that's where we post everything. And there's also if you sign up through the Gov delivery to get like rulemaking updates, you should get announcements of the meetings as well.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
That's great.
there any other public comments? All right. Well, are there any committee member comments? Anything that anybody'd like to bring to the table at this point? For myself, I'll just say congrats to the department for finally moving on from interim manager status to confirmed appointment.
Yeah. Thank you. And just in case folks on this committee hadn't heard, the Senate confirmed Ivan Gall as the next director of the department. He will start on July 1st. So.
Good. Well, if there's nothing else, I consider a motion to adjourn for the day.
I'll move to adjourn.
Thanks, Ken. I'll second that.
Second.
All right. Well, thanks, Ivan and Laura. Appreciate it. Appreciate that. Or Justin, sorry. Justin.
Happens all the time. All right. Well, thanks, folks. Appreciate your time today. And again, our next meeting is scheduled for September 10th, Tuesday before the September commission meetings. And I'll have an agenda out as we get closer to the date, but not as close as I cut it this time around. So my apologies for being tight. The couple weeks between our May meeting and June really snuck up on me. So thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye now.